Hi everyone, I'm Parisa. This is our guest of honor, Puma. He's a little sleepy, so we let him just chill. This is the third video in the series of why relationships fail. And after this series is over, we're going to have another set of videos talking about how to make a relationship thrive. If you haven't seen the part 1 and 2 of this video, please go back and watch them. So the first video was a global idea about why relationships fail, the main reason why, and that comes back to our childhood, our traumas that we carry through our life and how they show up in relationships. The second part was talking about how specifically these traumas show themselves in our conflicts. Today in this video, we're going to get a little more in depth about trauma and conflicts and how it shows itself within our relationships. And we're going to get a little more granular with it. So I keep using the word trauma. If it triggers you in a negative way that you don't want to hear about it, maybe replace it in your mind with another word, with maybe impactful experiences. It's just 2 words, it's harder to say, so I just keep saying trauma. But don't let any belief, any negative belief about this word stop you from watching these. So if it affects you in a negative way, please rephrase it in your mind with something that doesn't affect you as negatively. So as we grow up, as we go through these life experiences, that some of them has traumatic effects on us, our nervous system becomes programmed in a way to be able to respond to these series of events, to these traumas, to the best of its ability. I mean, a lot of times it's just about survival, right? It's about being able to survive and move on with life and have a happy life without being held back and getting stuck in that experience that happened. In the first video, I talk about my childhood experience as a little girl being molested. If my mind wanted to stay in that experience and wanted to even remember it, I didn't remember it for most of my life, but if I did remember it, it would have probably had such a painful effect on me that I couldn't carry on with life. So the brain and the nervous system prepares us to be able to survive and move on with life regardless of the experiences and the traumas that we go through. But what happens is that the nervous system comes up with a series of responses to these experiences. I'm sure you've heard about the fight, flight, fawn, freeze responses to traumatic experiences. And when we are programmed with one or some of these responses, they become ingrained in our nervous system. So let me give you a real life example. If somebody's reaction, their nervous system reaction to unpleasant experiences in their life has been freezing, right? They go into the freeze mode when something unpleasant happens to them. That response stays with them. That becomes their default mode. That becomes their immediate response. If somebody's reaction to unpleasant experiences is fighting, that becomes their default immediate response without thinking. That's how their nervous system becomes programmed. Now, we don't have just one response to everything. Sometimes it depends on the degree and the intensity of the unpleasantness in that experience. So for me, if something happens that's not pleasant to me, my first immediate response is flight. I just leave the situation, right? If the degree and intensity of that experience is higher, I freeze. So I have 2 different modes of response. Each person could have different modes of response depending on what happens and the degree and intensity of what happens. But what I want you to know is that there are responses, default modes that are ingrained within our nervous system. So let's say, continuing from the previous video, if you are having a conflicted argument with your partner and they hear what you say, they interpret it in a certain way, it triggers some of their old wounds and old traumas in them, it hurts, the brain remembers that trauma because a part of your consciousness is still stuck in that moment of trauma because it's not healed yet. So their brain remembers that trauma. the brain cannot distinguish between actually firsthand experiencing that trauma or just remembering it. It triggers the same response as if they were in that moment of trauma at that second that you're arguing with them. So what happens if their default mode is fighting, if when that event happened to them, they start fighting with you, they blow out of proportion and you just don't know what happened. You just said something that wasn't that big of a deal, but what happens is that it triggers them in a way that they think they are in that moment of trauma when they were 9 years old, whatever happened to them, and they show the same amount of response that their nervous system is programmed to show. If you tell me something that triggers an unpleasant experience within me, an unhealed wound, and I start having emotional reactions to it, and when that event happened, when that wound that's not healed at the moment happened, if my reaction was to flight, to just get up and go, to just like be able to survive and just run away, I'll get up and leave that conversation. I'm not going to sit there and have a conversation with you because, again, my mind cannot distinguish between being in that moment of trauma or experiencing it secondhand because of being triggered. So what I want you to have in mind is, as you go through your conflicts, which every relationship has a certain amount of conflict, you get to not only think about the trigger points in you, in your partner. I know it's getting a little too much, but bear with me. I have solutions for it. We just got to go through this information so I can tell you how to handle all this. You're going to think about the trigger points in you, in your partner, and think about what is your nervous system programmed to do in that moment when it is triggered. When you bring all this to awareness, then it's not automatic anymore. It's not out of control anymore. Then you start gaining power over it. If your default mode is to snap and to be in fight mode as soon as something is triggered, and you bring that into awareness, then you can really take a breath and think about it. Okay, I'm going into that default mode. I'm going into how my nervous system is programmed. That's when you have the opportunity to emotionally reprogram yourself and revive yourself and be able to actually have a mature conversation without showing immediate automatic responses. And that's when you see automatic responses, when you see responses that are coming from old conditioning and old programming in the nervous system, you can pick it up, you can recognize it, and you can treat it differently. Instead of treating it with more reactions, you can just know that, okay, this person doesn't have control over this. They don't know what they're doing. It's just like something that's ingrained in them. So let me give them some space, let them go through it, and then approach it from a different angle and at a different time or differently. That's when we can change the course of our conflicts and gain power over them. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please go ahead and give it a thumb up, share it with your friends and family, and I'll see you in the next video.